In early December 1979, a mixed unit of South American peacekeepers and U.S. agents cut their way through the dense jungles of northern Suriname. Their mission was to locate a man named Daniel Hart, an American preacher who had led hundreds of followers into the wilderness nearly 5 years earlier. Hart had founded what he called Haven's Gate, a self-sustaining settlement carved out of the rainforest and cut off from the outside world. The only way to reach it was through miles of mud, thick vines, and trees towering over 30 meters high. But the jungle wasn't the real threat. The people were. Intelligence suggested that Hart's followers were heavily armed and fanatically loyal. When the task force finally reached the settlement, they expected gunfire. Instead, they were met with silence. The village lay still, sunlight glinting off hundreds of tin rooftops. As they advanced toward the main square, the horror revealed itself. Hundreds of lifeless bodies sprawled around the central meeting hall. Men, women, and countless children. Nearly 1,000 had died. It was the largest deliberate loss of American civilian life up to that point. What began years earlier as the People's Temple of Renewal had once been a small progressive church in California. Hart had gained a devoted following through promises of equality, spiritual peace, and communal living. But his radical political views, especially his open admiration for socialist governments abroad, soon drew heavy scrutiny. Facing pressure from journalists and U.S. officials, he fled the country in 1975 with several hundred loyal followers, settling deep in the South American rainforest. To his followers, Hart painted this move as a chance to build paradise. Propaganda films showed smiling families eating homegrown food, children laughing, and workers tending the land. "We grow our own crops," he said in one recording, "and we live free of greed and hate." The truth, however, was much darker. Residents were forced to work from sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Contact with the outside world was forbidden. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter fences, and passports were confiscated. Anyone who tried to flee was hunted down. As months passed, relatives back in the United States began to sound the alarm. In response, Congressman David Rayburn assembled a delegation of journalists and family members to investigate. On December 10, 1979, they arrived at Haven's Gate. Outwardly, the place seemed peaceful. Children sang, people smiled, and Daniel Hart himself welcomed them warmly. It was all an illusion. Hart had rehearsed every word his followers would say. Later that evening, 2 young members secretly slipped a handwritten note to one of the journalists. It read, "Please get us out. They won't let us leave." When word spread, several others found the courage to come forward, begging to be taken home. The next morning, Rayburn's group escorted the defectors to a small airstrip a few kilometers away. Just as they began boarding the planes, a truck filled with Hart's armed men roared onto the field and opened fire. Congressman Rayburn and 3 others were killed instantly. Back at Haven's Gate, Hart gathered everyone in the central hall. His voice trembled through a loudspeaker. "They're coming for us. There's no going back now. The only freedom left is the one we take ourselves." Moments later, he ordered his followers to drink a mixture laced with cyanide. Some obeyed willingly, believing his promise of eternal liberation. Others were forced at gunpoint. Children were given the poison by their parents, or injected when they refused. By the time the peacekeeping unit arrived, the entire settlement was silent. Nearly 1,000 bodies lay scattered through the compound. To those who witnessed it, it was as if the jungle itself had swallowed an entire town, a place built on faith, consumed by madness, and remembered only as a warning to the world. In late summer 2016, Elias Holm, an environmental inspector for the small town of Ravendale, was out in the forest marking trees for a conservation survey. It was a quiet, ordinary day, until something strange caught his eye. Just beyond the hiking path, half hidden beneath ferns and thick moss, he noticed the corner of a dark structure. As he pushed through the brush, Elias froze. Standing before him was a cabin, not a crude shelter hastily thrown together, but a carefully built dwelling. It had a sturdy stone foundation, waterproof sheeting stretched over the roof, and even a metal lock on the front door. Puzzled, Elias called the local forest rangers. Over the next several days, they quietly observed the site, hoping its owner might return. No one did. Eventually, they broke the lock and stepped inside. only to find the place fully equipped for someone to live there long term. There were water containers, canned food, a small wood stove, and neatly stacked books lining a wooden shelf. A sleeping bag was laid out carefully in one corner. It felt less like a squatter's hideout and more like a minimalist apartment tucked away in the wild. Yet there wasn't a single clue to who the resident was. No identification, no photographs, nothing personal. After several more days of silence, the rangers decided to treat it as an abandoned site. They left an official removal notice on the door and made plans to dismantle the structure later that week. But when Elias and the team returned, they were met with a scene that made no sense. The entire cabin had disappeared, completely. The ground where it once stood was bare. Not even a single nail or piece of scrap wood remained. The only thing left was a charcoal-drawn symbol on a rock nearby, one that resembled an international mark often used by squatters. No one ever saw the cabin again. Who built it, how it vanished overnight, and why someone would go to such lengths to live unseen in the forest remains a mystery that's never been solved. A mechanic named Thomas Brenner traveled out to a remote homestead near Hollow Creek, a quiet farming region surrounded by thick woodland. He had been hired a few weeks earlier to repair a motor used in the family's barn. But when he arrived that morning, something felt wrong almost immediately. The cattle in the stables were restless, stamping and lowing as if they hadn't been tended to in days. Yet the rest of the property was silent. No voices, no footsteps, not even the sound of a door closing. Thomas called out several times, then knocked on the farmhouse door, but there was no response. After waiting nearly an hour, he decided to go ahead and fix the motor anyway. The door to the machinery shed was unlocked, so he stepped inside and finished the job, intending to return later for payment. When he left, he couldn't shake a strange unease. Thomas made his way to the nearest farmstead, nearly half a kilometer away, to inform Lawrence Dieter, a neighbor of the family, about what he had seen. Lawrence frowned. He knew the family well and was certain they hadn't mentioned going anywhere. That evening, he gathered two other locals, and together they decided to investigate. When the three men arrived at the Hollow Creek homestead, the stillness was overwhelming. The barn door was shut, but the smaller machinery door stood ajar, just as Thomas had described. The men entered cautiously, lanterns in hand. At first, everything seemed ordinary, until one of them noticed something pale sticking out from beneath a mound of hay. It was a human foot. When they pulled the hay aside, their lanterns revealed a sight none of them would ever forget. Beneath the hay lay the elder matriarch of the house, her skull fractured. Nearby were the bodies of her son, his wife, and their teenage daughter. Inside the farmhouse, two more victims were discovered, a toddler in his cradle and the family's maid, both brutally killed. The local authorities concluded that the murders had occurred several days earlier, likely during the night of March 31st. Evidence suggested that whoever committed the crime had stayed on the property afterward, feeding the animals and attempting to hide the bodies beneath hay and blankets. In the maid's room, clothes had even been stuffed into the window frame to block the view from outside. At first, investigators believed it was a robbery gone wrong, but all the family's money and valuables were still inside the house. Neighbors later recalled seeing figures watching the farm from the tree line in the weeks before the murders. The family's previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming she heard footsteps in the attic and voices at night. No suspect was ever caught, and as the years passed, the Hollow Creek farmhouse was left to rot, swallowed by the forest, a grim reminder of a mystery that no one ever solved. In the spring of 2017, a hiker named Daniel Ward was trekking through the quiet, sprawling Black Ridge Woods, a forested area known for its dense trails and wildlife. About halfway through his hike, something unusual caught his eye. A trail camera lying face down on the forest floor. Trail cameras are common in those parts, usually left behind by hunters or nature enthusiasts to capture deer or foxes at night. But this one looked odd. It had no battery and no memory card, and part of its casing was scratched as if someone had ripped it off a tree in a hurry. Assuming it had simply been abandoned, Daniel decided to take it home. He later gave it to a friend, Eli, who loved tinkering with electronics, to see if it could be fixed. Neither of them knew the truth. The camera wasn't broken. It was a trap. As soon as Eli connected a power source to test it, the device exploded. The blast tore through his hands and abdomen, blowing off several fingers and leaving him critically injured. The explosion was later determined to have been triggered by the moment power was restored to the circuit. A deliberate, calculated setup. When authorities arrived and questioned Daniel, he led them back to the spot in Black Ridge Woods where he'd found the camera. A search team combed the area and uncovered another rig camera, wired in a similar way, ready to detonate upon activation. Investigators canvassed nearby towns for leads, and eventually 2 locals came forward. They reported hearing a loud blast months earlier from the property of a man named Martin Shaw, a 38-year-old recluse who lived on the outskirts of town. When police searched Martin's house, they found buckets filled with explosive materials, disassembled electronics, and a disturbing handwritten note that read, "A broken machine for a broken world." Martin was taken into custody, and during questioning, he admitted to placing several of the devices throughout the forest, though he refused to say exactly how many. While assisting police in locating them, he suddenly lunged for an officer's sidearm in what appeared to be a desperate escape attempt. In the ensuing struggle, he was fatally shot. Before his death, Martin helped investigators locate a dozen more explosive trail cameras scattered through the forest. But officials believe there may still be others, lying deep in the woods disguised as ordinary wildlife cameras, waiting for someone curious enough to pick them up. 1986, a hunter was trekking through the thick pine woods of Ashwood Forest, just outside the small town of Millhaven. He had walked that same trail dozens of times before, but this time something strange caught his eye. A large, rusted metal drum, half buried under a pile of branches and leaves. Curious, he brushed away the debris and pried open the lid. What he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside the barrel were the dismembered remains of 2 people, a woman and a young girl. Authorities were immediately called to the scene. Both victims had suffered blunt force trauma before being cut apart and placed inside the container. Unfortunately, the bodies were so badly decomposed and mutilated that investigators couldn't identify them. With no fingerprints, no missing person reports that matched, and no witnesses, the case soon went cold. Years passed until the spring of 2001, when a state ranger revisiting the same stretch of forest stumbled upon something horrifyingly familiar. About 200 yards from where the first barrel had been found, there was another, identical in shape, size, and condition. Inside were the remains of 2 small children, both girls, estimated to be between 2 and 5 years old. They had been killed in the exact same manner: blunt force trauma, then dismemberment. The connection was undeniable. Whoever had done this was responsible for all 4 murders. The discovery reignited the case, but it would take more than a decade before modern technology finally began to shed light on the mystery. In 2015, with the help of advanced DNA profiling, 3 of the 4 victims were finally identified. The adult woman was 25-year-old Mara Linden, and 2 of the children, Emily and Rose, were her daughters. The 4th child, however, had no genetic link to the others, suggesting she had been taken from a different family entirely. Further DNA comparison led investigators to a man named Gordon Hale, a drifter who had lived under several false identities throughout the 1970s and 80s. When police looked into his background, they discovered he'd already been in prison for murdering another woman in 2003 and had died in custody years earlier. Though his DNA tied him directly to the Ashwood victims, Hale's motive, methods, and the identity of the 4th child remain unknown. Even now, the site where the barrels were found is avoided by locals. The trees have grown thick around it again, but those who pass by swear the woods feel colder there, as if the forest itself remembers what was hidden beneath its soil.